A poor girl in a wheelchair holds a tattered teddy bear while staring at the door of the orphanage. When the young billionaire arrives to make a donation, she whispers, "My little brother was chosen, but not me, because I'm too much trouble." Upon hearing this, he bursts into tears and his life changes forever. The black car parked discreetly in front of the iron gate. Theo adjusted his watch, took a deep breath, and looked at the brown envelope on the passenger seat. Inside it was a check with enough money to fix the entire roof of St. Clair's Home for Children. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would draw attention, just what was needed. There was something strange about coming back. 15 years had passed since he left that place for the last time, never looking back, vowing never to return. Yet here he was, his palms slightly sweaty and heart racing, as though he were still the scared boy he once was. Theo hadn't warned anyone he was coming. He didn't want welcome committees or emotional speeches about how he was an example of triumph over adversity. He hated that kind of thing. He preferred the simplicity of a quick visit, a quiet delivery, and leaving without fanfare. In his world of endless meetings and decisions involving millions of dollars, that simple honesty was rare. 15 minutes, tops, he told the driver, who nodded respectfully. The gate creaked just like in the old days. Some things never changed. Theo smiled slightly, remembering how many times he and the other boys had been caught trying to sneak out through that very gate. The telltale noise of the old metal was like an invisible guard. The garden looked smaller now. The trees had grown, creating generous patches of shade along the sides of the main building. The facade had been painted a pale yellow that didn't match his memories. Back in his day, the walls were painted a depressing institutional grey. Contrary to what he expected, the courtyard was full of life. Children ran from one side to the other, laughing and shouting. A group was playing ball near the entrance, while others played tag around the swings. The scene was almost identical to his recollections, except that he was no longer a part of it. Then his eyes caught something different. In the corner of the courtyard, partially hidden by the shadow of an old oak tree, sat a small child in a blue wheelchair watching everything in silence. She wore a simple floral print dress, her hair tied into two uneven braids. In her lap, clutched tightly, was a brown teddy bear, visibly worn over time, missing one eye and with patches on its paws. Something about her immediately captured Theo's attention. Maybe it was the way she watched the other kids playing, her gaze a mixture of longing and resignation. Or maybe it was simply the contrast, a small island of stillness amid all that motion and noise. Without much thought, Theo changed his path. Instead of going straight to the administration office, he walked toward the girl. She didn't notice him right away, too focused on stroking the bear's frayed ears. "Hi," he said, keeping a respectful distance. The girl looked up, surprised. She eyed him with curiosity but without fear. "Hi," she replied softly, adjusting the bear on her lap as if presenting it. "This is Benny." "Nice to meet you, Benny," Theo said with a smile, inclining his head slightly toward the toy. "You two look like good friends." "He's my best friend," she confirmed solemnly. "He's been with me since before I came here." A caregiver approached, clearly worried about a stranger talking to one of the children. Theo quickly identified himself, mentioning the donation he'd come to deliver. She relaxed but stayed close by. "Don't you want to play with the other kids?" Theo asked, noticing how she kept watching the ball game. The girl hugged the bear even tighter and shook her head. "I can't keep up," she explained, pointing to the wheelchair. "And nobody has the patience to wait." There was an acceptance in her voice that felt all too familiar to Theo. That calm resignation of someone who's understood far too early that the world doesn't always adjust itself to those who are different. "Have you lived here long?" he asked, crouching to be at her eye level. "Almost a year," she replied, looking again toward the group of children. "My younger brother was here too, but he left last month." "He left?" The girl nodded, rearranging the bear in her lap. Her gaze grew distant for a moment, as though seeing beyond the courtyard. "My little brother was chosen, but not me because I'm too much trouble." Her words came out simple and direct, with no trace of self-pity, like she was stating something obvious, such as the color of the sky or the shape of clouds. It was that very matter-of-factness that hit Theo like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs for a moment. He knew that feeling all too well. The sensation of being overlooked, of being too complicated to be worth a family. Her words were the same as the ones he'd told himself so many times, sitting alone in that very courtyard years ago. The caregiver, who had kept a polite distance, stepped in at that moment. "Lily, it's almost time for your medicine. We need to go inside." The girl nodded obediently. She glanced at Theo one last time and gave him a small, shy smile. "Bye," she said, waving with the hand not holding the bear. "Bye, Lily," he replied, standing up. As the caregiver pushed the wheelchair toward the main building, Theo stayed where he was, watching them leave. The girl's words echoed in his mind. "I'm too much trouble." That sentence haunted him for the rest of his visit. He handed the envelope in at reception, hastily signed the donation paperwork, and politely declined the invitation for a tour of the newly renovated facilities. His mind was elsewhere. In the car on his way back to his penthouse in the city center, he couldn't shake the image of Lily and her one-eyed bear. The meetings that afternoon felt interminable. While discussing mergers and acquisitions, all he could think of was that sad smile, that early acceptance of abandonment. That night, alone in his minimalist apartment overlooking the city, Theo found himself rummaging through a box kept at the back of his closet. Inside, among a few scattered reminders of his past, lay a small green plastic dinosaur, the only toy he managed to keep during all his years at the orphanage. Without giving it much thought, he grabbed his phone and called his assistant. "Emily, I need you to buy something for me tomorrow morning." "Of course, Mr. Walker. What is it?" "A teddy bear, the best one you can find." Silence on the other end broke only when he added, "And cancel my morning appointments. I need to pay another visit." The next morning arrived with a cloudless sky. Theo woke before his alarm, unusual for his routine. On the living room table lay an elegant paper bag bearing the golden logo of an exclusive toy store. Inside was a doll with brown hair and large, unexpressive eyes, wearing a blue dress with small embroidered flowers and matching white shoes. Emily had followed his instructions to the letter. The best one you can find. The toy's price likely matched a caregiver's monthly salary at the orphanage, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that it wasn't just another doll, but something special. The driver found it odd that they were returning to the same place the next day, but maintained his professionalism. During the ride, Theo gazed out the window, lost in thought. The bustling city streets gave way to quieter avenues, and finally the tree-lined road leading to St. Clair's. "I'll be a bit longer today," he told the driver when the car stopped at the gate. This time, there was no envelope in hand, just the new doll cradled carefully in his arms. The gate squeaked the same way, and the garden seemed just as small, but now everything felt different to his eyes. Details he had missed the day before leapt out at him. The colorful curtains in the dorm windows, children's drawings pinned on the hallway board, the broken swing that needed repair. He headed straight to reception. The secretary recognized him immediately and smiled. "Mr. Walker, what a surprise. We didn't expect to see you back so soon." "I forgot to settle something," he said vaguely. "Is Mrs. Martha working today, by any chance? I'd like to speak with her." Martha Harris was the senior caregiver at the orphanage. She'd worked there back when Theo was just another kid without a family. If anyone could give him information about Lily, it would be her. The secretary nodded and asked him to wait in the small reception area. Theo sat uncomfortably in a chair that felt too small for his adult frame. The new doll rested in his lap, looking out of place in his large hands. Minutes later, a woman with graying hair and a poised demeanor entered the room. Her face bore the marks of decades spent caring for children, but her eyes remained lively and alert. At the sight of Theo, a genuine smile lit her features. "Theodore Walker," she said, using his full name just as she had when he was young. "So good to see you again." Theo stood up and shook her outstretched hand. He felt an urge to hug her, but refrained. Martha had been one of the few who truly cared about him during his time here. "Martha, you haven't changed at all." She laughed, a warm sound that reminded him of bedtime stories. "You've changed completely. Look at you, a successful businessman." Her eyes landed on the doll. "And with a new friend, I see." Theo glanced down at the toy in his hands, suddenly feeling a bit self-conscious. How could he explain why he was here? "Actually, I came because of one of the children, a girl named Lily. Martha's smile softened into a more thoughtful expression. Lily, of course. You met her in the courtyard yesterday, right? Theo nodded. She told me something that touched me, about her brother being adopted and her not. Martha motioned for them to sit down. The room was empty, but she spoke quietly regardless. Do you know how she ended up here? He asked. The woman sighed, a tired but kind look in her eyes. Lily arrived almost a year ago. Her parents died in a car accident. Her younger brother was adopted a few months later. She has very few belongings, just that old bear she brought from home. She never complains about anything, but she hasn't been the same since. Each word hung in the air like lead. Theo felt a pang in his chest imagining what she'd been through, losing her parents and then watching her brother leave as well. How does she act day to day? He asked, genuinely interested. She's sweet, quiet, very mature for her age, Martha said. She helps the younger kids with their homework. She's patient when teaching them, but she barely plays. She just watches the others, as if she's always on the outside. Martha paused, eyeing Theo with curiosity. May I ask why your interest? Theo looked down at the doll in his hands. Even he couldn't fully explain it yet. I think I identify with her. Martha nodded, understanding without further explanation. She'd known him as a child. She knew his story. She's probably in the back garden by now. She likes to stay near the flowers when the weather is nice. Theo thanked her and stood. Martha watched him for a moment before adding, It's good to see you back, Theodore, doing something like this. He only nodded before stepping out, not trusting himself to speak. The back garden was smaller than the main courtyard, but well tended. Small flower beds encircled a grassy area, with wooden benches in the shade. Lily was there, just as Martha had said, her wheelchair parked near a bed of daisies. The old bear sat in her lap, same as the day before. Theo hesitated at the garden's entrance. Suddenly, his plan seemed presumptuous, maybe even intrusive. What was he doing here anyway? What right did he have to show up in this child's life? But before he could overthink it, Lily turned her head and saw him. A tiny smile of recognition appeared on her face. There was no going back now. He walked over, feeling strangely nervous. He stopped at a respectful distance and tried to smile naturally. Hi, Lily, remember me? We met yesterday. You're the man who talked to Benny, she answered, pointing at the threadbare bear. That's right, Theo confirmed, relaxing a bit. I brought something for you. He held out the new doll, feeling clumsy. Lily looked at the toy with wide, surprised eyes. For a moment, she didn't move, as though she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Is it for me? She finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. Yes. I thought you might like it. Lily reached out hesitantly, taking the new doll in her arms. She touched its delicate dress admiringly, ran her fingers through its soft hair, gazed into its bright eyes. Then, to Theo's surprise, she hugged it tightly to her chest, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was a glow in them that hadn't been there before. Her name is going to be Teddy, she declared with conviction, as though the name had been decided a long time ago. There was something in the simplicity of that moment, in the pure joy reflected in her eyes, that instantly connected them. Theo felt as if an invisible thread had been stretched between them. Still fragile, but very real. Teddy is a great name, he agreed, sitting on a bench near her chair. Lily placed Teddy next to Benny in her lap and introduced them formally, speaking to both toys as though they were old friends meeting for the first time. Theo watched, charmed by the seriousness with which she conducted this little ceremony. In that quiet garden beneath the gentle morning sun, something began to change. Neither Theo nor Lily realized it at the time, but that simple gesture, a doll offered without grand words, had planted the seed of something that would grow far beyond either of their expectations. One visit turned into two. Two became three. Before he knew it, Theo had created a new routine in his always busy schedule. Every Wednesday at 3 in the afternoon, his driver would drop him off at the gates of St. Clair's. At first, these visits were short and somewhat formal. He brought small gifts, colorful books, crayons, a jigsaw puzzle with big pieces. and spent about half an hour with Lily in the garden. The girl awaited him with barely disguised excitement, always with Benny and Teddy on her lap, watching the gate long before the appointed time. The orphanage staff noticed Lily's change. The once quiet child who spent hours alone began to smile more. She started counting the days to the next visit, marking little boxes on a calendar Martha had given her specifically for that purpose. "How many days are left?" she would ask anyone who passed by. Over time, the visits grew longer. Theo began cancelling meetings and delegating tasks to spend more time with the girl. Half an hour stretched into 1 hour, then 2. One time, he lost track of time and stayed until nightfall, reading stories she had never heard. "Just one more, please," Lily would beg, her eyes shining with eagerness, and he would read, reading as he had never read before, giving each character a different voice, pausing dramatically at the right moments, watching her face light up at each twist in the tale. On a particularly hot afternoon, Theo arrived with a larger bag than usual. Inside was a complete set of art materials, paper with different textures, crayons, markers, and professional colored pencils. Lily's eyes widened when she saw so many colors at once. "They're all for me?" she asked, incredulous. "All yours," Theo confirmed. "Martha told me you like to draw." Lily picked up a red marker and examined it as though it were a precious jewel. She carefully placed the cap to one side so she wouldn't lose it, and immediately began drawing. Theo watched, fascinated by her concentration, her tongue peeking out at the corner of her mouth. Her eyes focused on the paper. "What are you drawing?" he asked after a few minutes. "A house," she replied without looking up, "with ramps instead of stairs." It was the first time Theo noticed a pattern. In subsequent drawings, he realized she always included large windows and ramps. Houses, schools, stores. Every building she drew had those features. "Why so many ramps?" he asked once. Lily looked at him as if the answer were obvious. "So I can go anywhere," she explained simply. "And big windows so I can see outside, even when I can't go out." In that moment, Theo understood something about her limitations that he had never truly considered. For Lily, the world was full of invisible barriers he, with fully functional legs, had never had to face. During another visit, he noticed how carefully she stored every gift he brought. In a shoebox decorated with colorful stickers, she kept all their drawings, the pencils still perfectly sharpened, the markers always with their caps, and the small toys immaculately clean. "Why do you keep everything so carefully?" he asked. Lily shrugged, as though the question were hardly worth asking. "To make them last longer," she finally said. "Things go away if you don't take care of them." The simple statement carried a weight that hit Theo like a physical blow. For a child who had lost so much so quickly, preserving what she had was an act of survival. On a rainy afternoon, when they couldn't sit in the garden, they stayed in the orphanage's small library. Lily flipped through a book on marine animals, while Theo answered emails on his phone. The silence between them was comfortable, like old friends who don't need to fill every second with chatter. Suddenly, without looking up from the book, Lily asked, "Do you have kids?" The straightforwardness of the question caught Theo off guard. "No," he replied simply. "Why not?" He smiled at her curiosity. "I guess I've never met the right person to start a family with," he explained, "and I was always so busy with work." She nodded, as though the answer made perfect sense. She kept turning the pages of the book, taking in the colorful images of dolphins and turtles. Then, without warning, she asked another question. "Did you have parents?" The question landed like a knife, cutting the air between them. Theo felt his body tense instantly. It wasn't a simple question, not for him. The silence stretched, heavy as lead. Lily looked up from the book, noticing the change. She observed his tense expression and how his fingers gripped the phone too tightly. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Was that a bad question?" Her small voice brought Theo back to the present. He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, it wasn't a bad question," he finally said. "It's just complicated." "Like me?" Lily asked. "I had parents, but they went away." "More or less," he agreed, choosing his words carefully. "My parents didn't die like yours. They left me here when I was little and never came back. It was the first time he had said it out loud in years. Not even in therapy had he managed to put it so plainly. He always used euphemisms, technical terms, emotional distance. I was institutionalized. I lived in a care home. I grew up in the system. Never the raw truth. I was abandoned. Lily took in the information with the seriousness only a child who has known loss can possess. That hurts more, she stated, because they chose to leave. The accuracy of her observation felt like a punch to his gut. That was exactly it. The pain of knowing his parents had a choice and still decided to leave him behind. Memories he'd buried deep resurfaced. The first weeks in the orphanage, crying every night, convinced his parents would return any minute. His first birthday alone, waiting for a call that never came. The broken promises, the letter he wrote at age 12 that went unanswered. Then the cold resolution he made at 14. Not to cry anymore, not to wait anymore, not to need anyone anymore. I really miss my parents, Lily said, cutting into his thoughts. And my brother too. Sometimes I cry secretly when I remember my mom's perfume, or how my dad used to carry me on his shoulders. Gabriel, my brother, always slept with me when I was scared of storms. She hugged Teddy and Benny more tightly. But you came back, she continued. You came back to the place that hurt you. The observation was so simple and direct, it struck a deep chord in Theo. He'd never thought of it that way. Coming back to the orphanage was like facing a past he'd spent decades avoiding, and in some way, meeting Lily had given that return a new meaning. Yeah, I guess I did come back, he admitted. You're brave, she said, with conviction. Theo almost laughed. No one had ever called him brave for something so fundamental. Daring in business? Yes. Ruthless in negotiations? Absolutely. But brave for confronting his own demons. This was new. You're brave too, he told her. Very brave. She smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face despite everything she had lost. Can we read another story? She asked, shifting gears with the ease only a child can, and so Wednesdays became the highlight of Theo's week. He, who used to measure success in acquisitions and profits, started to mark his best moments by Lily's expressions, the smile when he arrived, the concentration while drawing, the curiosity during story time. His co-workers noticed the change. Emily, his assistant, commented that he seemed more relaxed, less obsessed over tiny details. Robert, his business partner of over a decade, noted that he smiled more, something extremely rare in the past. Did you meet someone? Robert asked during a business lunch. Yes, Theo answered, without elaborating. How could he explain that the person changing his life was a child in a wheelchair holding a one-eyed teddy bear and a doll that never left her lap? One afternoon, after nearly 2 months of weekly visits, Theo arrived at the orphanage and found Lily silently crying in the garden. His chest tightened at the sight of tears rolling down her small face. What happened? He asked, kneeling beside her chair. Today is Gabriel's birthday, she explained between sobs. Last year, we made a cake together. Mum let us make a huge chocolate mess in the kitchen. Without a second thought, Theo hugged her. It was their first real physical contact beyond handshakes or light shoulder pats. Lily clung to him as though he were a lifeboat in a stormy sea. It's okay to cry, he murmured. Good memories can hurt sometimes, but they're still important. Do you have good memories of your parents? She asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Theo thought for a moment. Some. My mom used to sing me to sleep, and my dad taught me how to play checkers. Do you cry when you remember? Not anymore, he admitted. But I was angry for a very long time. Lily pulled back slightly and looked at him, tears still glistening in her eyes. I'm angry sometimes too, she confessed. At God, for taking my parents. At the people who took my brother, but didn't want me. It's not fair. Her honesty disarmed him. Theo had never met anyone so direct, so free of pretense. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected not just the present, but also his past. A past full of unvoiced hurts and silent rages. Anger is part of it, he said, surprised by his own wisdom. Just don't let it take up too much space. Lily nodded, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. For a moment, they both remained quiet, each lost in thoughts. Then she looked up at him, her face gentler. "Thanks for coming today," she said simply. "Always," Theo replied, realizing that single word held a bigger promise than any he had made before. Lily's fragile but genuine smile made Theo realize how his own wounds were slowly healing as he helped her deal with hers. Two wounded hearts finding solace in the mutual understanding of a pain few others could grasp. St. Clair's Home for Children had official visiting days. Twice a month, potential adoptive parents would come to meet the children. Those days were filled with anticipation, energy, and inevitably noise. The kids wore their best clothes, carefully combed their hair, and practiced smiling in the mirror. The air brimmed with hope and anxiety. Theo arrived on one of those days, unaware. As soon as he parked, he noticed the difference. More cars in the lot, unfamiliar voices echoing in the corridors, and a buzzing atmosphere. "Visiting day," the receptionist explained when she saw him, "always on the second Monday of the month." Theo nodded, feeling out of place. Normally he would head straight to the garden or library, where Lily usually waited. Now, he had no idea how to find her amidst all the commotion. He walked down the main hallway, observing interactions. In various rooms, couples chatted with kids, playing games and asking questions. Staff members hovered, discreetly supervising and stepping in to facilitate conversations when needed. Laughter, excited voices, and occasionally a younger child's tears over shyness echoed throughout. Theo searched for Lily in all the common areas. She wasn't in the library, the cafeteria, or the back garden. Finally, he decided to ask Martha. "Lily?" The woman sighed, her expression a mix of concern and understanding. "She doesn't join the visiting days. She never wants to." "Where is she then?" Martha hesitated for a moment, as though weighing whether she should disclose that information. "In the old book storage room next to the library. We turned it into a small reading nook. It's quiet there." She paused. "She doesn't like crowds or noise, says it hurts her ears." Theo thanked her and headed to the indicated spot. The small room was down a lesser-used corridor. The door was ajar. He knocked gently before entering. The space was small but cozy. Low bookshelves lined two walls, filled with worn paperbacks. A high window let in a beam of light that illuminated floating dust particles. In the far corner, seated at a little table, was Lily. She didn't notice him right away, too absorbed in a large illustrated book, turning pages with meticulous care. Benny and Teddy were strategically placed beside her, silent guardians. "May I come in?" Theo asked softly. Lily looked up, surprised. A smile lit her face when she recognized him, but there was something different in her eyes, a tension in her shoulders that wasn't usually there. "You came," she said, closing the book. "Even though it's visiting day." "I didn't realize it was visiting day," he admitted, stepping in and closing the door, muffling the distant din. "Martha told me where to find you." He sat on a small chair across from her. The room's silence was a welcome contrast to the rest of the orphanage. "You don't like these days," he said, not quite a question but rather a statement. Lily shrugged, the gesture Theo had learned to interpret as her way of handling uncomfortable topics. "It's too noisy, too many people staring, asking questions." She positioned Teddy in her lap. "And they never look at me anyway." Her last sentence was nearly a whisper, laden with the weight of many disappointments. Theo felt a lump form in his throat. "I'd rather stay here," she continued. "It's quiet. Books don't ask hard questions." Glancing around, Theo noticed how the space reflected Lily's personality. Tidy, calm, full of stories waiting to be discovered, slightly removed from the world, but still with a window to observe it. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked. "I can come back another day if you'd rather be alone." Lily shook her head emphatically. "No, you can stay. You're quiet like me." The simplicity of her reply touched Theo in a way he hadn't expected. It was true. Both shared an appreciation for silence, for calm. Over the weeks they'd spent together, many of the most meaningful moments involved no words at all, just presence. "Then I'll stay," he said, pulling out his phone and switching it to silent mode. "We can read together, if you'd like." Lily smiled, and slid the illustrated book toward him. For nearly an hour, they turned pages together, occasionally commenting on the pictures but mostly enjoying the shared stillness. In the following days and weeks, Theo began checking the orphanage's calendar to avoid the busiest times. He discovered Lily felt more comfortable on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons when most other children had external activities, or on Saturday mornings when many slept in. During those quieter times, they formed their own routine. Sometimes they read side by side, each with their own book. Other times, Theo brought adapted board games that didn't require complex movements. Occasionally, they just sat in the garden, watching birds or clouds, exchanging the occasional remark. One day, Martha commented on the change when she encountered him in the hallway. "I've never seen Lily so at ease with someone," she said. "She's always been reserved, even before the accident. But with you, it's different." "I think we understand each other," Theo answered simply. On a particularly tranquil Saturday morning, nearly 3 months after their first meeting, they were in the back garden. The dew still sparkled on the leaves, and the air had that special quality that comes with the early hours of the day. Theo had brought a book of illustrated poems. Lily listened attentively, sometimes asking to see the illustrations. After the third poem, she rummaged through her backpack, which hung on the back of the wheelchair, and took out a carefully folded piece of paper. "I made something for you," she said, handing it over with unusual shyness, even for her. Theo took the sheet and unfolded it. It was a drawing made with the colored pencils he'd given her. It showed 2 figures, a tall man in what looked like a suit, with dark hair and a small but clear smile, and next to him, a little girl in a wheelchair holding what appeared to be 2 small toys, a brown teddy bear and a doll in a blue dress. At the top of the page, in carefully formed letters, were the words, "My new friend." The simplicity of the drawing and its caption struck Theo harder than he'd expected. He felt tightness in his chest, a surge of emotion so intense it briefly took his breath away. It wasn't just that he'd been depicted. It was the realization that, for this child who'd lost so much, he had become important enough to be called a friend. "Do you like it?" Lily asked, her voice revealing rare nervousness. Theo realized he'd been silent for too long, staring at the picture. "It's perfect," he said, his voice a bit raspy. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." He wasn't exaggerating. Over the years, Theo had received expensive gifts from partners, designer watches, valuable artwork. None of them had meant as much as this simple drawing made with colored pencils. "May I put it in my office?" he asked. Lily nodded, visibly relieved and happy at his reaction. "I made it because you always come to see me, even when you're busy, even when it's hard." Her comment revealed more awareness than Theo had imagined. She had noticed the days he arrived tense, work phone calls interrupting their time, nights of lost sleep over big negotiations. Yet he had never failed to appear on the agreed days. "I come because I want to be here," he said sincerely, "because our friendship is important to me." Lily's smile was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. For a moment, no more words were necessary. Their shared silence spoke volumes, full of mutual understanding. That night, in his apartment, Theo placed the drawing in a simple but elegant frame. He stood looking at it for a long time, reflecting on how that little girl in a wheelchair had become such a significant presence in his life. The next day, he called his assistant. "Emily, please cancel my Tuesday and Thursday afternoon appointments for the next few months," he instructed, "and also Saturday mornings." "All of them?" Emily asked, surprised. Theo had never requested such a regular arrangement before. "Yes, all of them. It's an important commitment." After hanging up, he looked again at the drawing on his office wall. The words, "my new friend," were so simple, yet they represented a profound transformation. For someone who had spent decades building walls around his heart, those 3 words signaled a monumental shift. The following week, when he arrived for his visit, he brought a special gift, an identical frame containing a professional photo of himself. On the back, in his careful handwriting, he'd written, "For my new friend, Lily. With affection, Theo." When he handed it to her, her face lit up in a way that made all the previous week's stress, tense meetings, tough negotiations, sleepless nights, feel insignificant. "Can I put it on my table?" she asked, tracing the frame's edge with her fingertips. "It's yours. You can put it wherever you want." Lily later explained that she kept it by her bed. It was the first thing she saw when she woke up, and the last thing before she slept. A reminder that even on the quietest days, someone was thinking of her. The silence that once was a solitary refuge for both of them became a shared space, where they didn't need words to express what was starting to grow between them. An unusual friendship built in small moments, in constant presence, in mutual acceptance. For Theo, who had always measured worth by numbers and acquisitions, these quiet moments with Lily slowly taught him a new form of accounting, one in which wealth was measured by smiles received, trust earned, and drawings pinned to an office wall. For Lily, who had learned too soon that people leave, Theo's constant presence was gradually rebuilding something she believed lost forever, the confidence that not everything precious disappears. And so, visit after visit, silence after silence, an unlikely bond grew, one that had started with a casual remark about being too much trouble, now expressed in the three simple words of a child's drawing, "My new friend." The rain began as a light drizzle around mid-morning and intensified throughout the day. By the time Theo arrived at the orphanage, the sky was completely grey, and water poured from the gutters, forming little waterfalls around the building. The steady patter of raindrops on the windows created a curtain of sound, further isolating them from the outside world. On days like this, the children usually stayed in the common room, playing board games, reading, or watching a movie. Lily, however, preferred the small library. She said the smell of books mixed with rain was her favorite perfume. Theo found her by the window, watching the drops roll down the glass. Her wheelchair was positioned so she could press her fingertips against the cold surface and trace the path of the water. Benny and Teddy lay in her lap, as always, silent witnesses to her contemplation. "Hello," he said softly, knocking on the open door to announce his presence. Lily turned, her face lighting up with a smile that contrasted with the dreary weather. Yet there was something else in her gaze that day, a shadow lurking behind her usual bright eyes. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said, "because of the rain." "I said I'd come, didn't I?" Theo replied, hanging his wet coat on the nearest rack. "A little rain doesn't scare me." He walked over and sat in the chair next to her. They both watched the downpour in silence for a few minutes. There was comfort in these shared quiet moments, a mutual understanding beyond words. But today, Theo sensed a question hanging in the air, some unspoken restlessness. "What's on your mind?" he finally asked, turning his gaze to her. Lily kept her eyes on the window, her fingers now still against the glass. "Why do you come see me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. The question caught him off guard, not so much because of its content, but because of the vulnerability in her tone. "What do you mean?" Lily finally turned to face him, her big eyes serious. "Do you come here because you pity me?" The question was like a punch to Theo's gut. For a moment he was speechless, searching for the right, honest response. "No," he said at last, with a conviction that surprised even him. "I come because you're the best part of my day." And as soon as he said the words, he realized how true they were. Over the past months, his visits to Lily had become the highlight of his week. On days he didn't come, he often found himself wondering what she was doing, what new drawings she might have made, what stories she might want to hear next. Lily's features softened at his answer, but there was still a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "Even though I'm too much trouble?" she asked, her voice tiny, almost fearful. That phrase, too much trouble, echoed back to the first time he heard her speak, in the courtyard about her brother's adoption. The same insecurity, the same doubt about her own worth, simply for being who she was. Theo leaned forward and gently took her small hand between his own. "Lily," he said, looking straight into her eyes, "you're not trouble. You're special." Something broke in the girl's expression, maybe a defense against hope. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were different from any he'd seen before, not of sorrow or pain, but something deeper, more complex. Without warning, she leaned forward and hugged him, her thin arms around his neck, her face pressed into his shoulder. Theo returned the hug carefully, not squeezing too tight or tipping her wheelchair. He felt her tears soak his shirt, but he said nothing, simply holding her, offering the silent comfort of his presence. When she finally pulled away, Lily smiled, a different smile, lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. "You're special too," she said, with the simple directness only children can have. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. They read, drew pictures, and chatted about small things. The bird nesting in the window ledge, the new book Martha had brought to the library, the shapes of the clouds once the rain eased. The rain continued, but less intensely. Theo watched Lily draw, admiring the focus on her face. She had a steady, confident line, even in her simplest sketches. She never hesitated when choosing colors or setting down shapes. It was as though, on paper, all her insecurities vanished. "What are you drawing?" he asked, leaning in to see. "Our favorite tree," Lily replied, pointing to the window that offered a view of the garden, where an ancient oak stood, its leaves gleaming in the rain. "Ours," Theo repeated, smiling at the way she so naturally included both of them in a unit. "Yes," she said, not lifting her eyes from the page. "You always sit under it when you come to see me in the garden." Indeed, over the months, they'd formed small rituals, special places, fleeting moments that only belonged to them. The tree was one of those places, a meeting point, a refuge on warm afternoons, a constant amid many changes. As the afternoon turned into evening, Theo realized he'd have to leave soon. But before that, there was something he wanted to do, something he'd been putting off for weeks. "Lily, do you mind if I check out something before I go? I won't be long." She nodded curiously. "Where?" "I want to see something from when I lived here." Understanding crossed her face, followed by genuine curiosity. "Can I come too?" Theo hesitated a moment. What he wanted to see was personal, a fragment of his past he'd kept hidden for years. But something in Lily's expectant expression made him nod. "Sure. I'll ask Martha to help with your chair on the stairs." Martha not only helped but insisted on accompanying them, explaining that the wing where Theo had stayed was under renovation and they needed her permission to enter. Theo realized she might also be curious about his reaction to revisiting that space. The third floor of the main building looked smaller than he remembered. The corridors that once seemed huge now felt narrow, almost claustrophobic. The walls that used to be a dismal institutional green were painted a light yellow, more welcoming. Martha stopped in front of a door labeled Dormitory 3. "Still remember where your bed was?" she asked. Theo nodded. How could he forget? 6 years in that same dorm, in the same bed, staring at the same window on sleepless nights. Martha opened the door and they went in. The dorm was empty, no mattresses on the beds, ready for renovation. But the basic layout remained. 5 metal-framed beds lined up against the wall, high windows, a small built-in closet where they kept their few belongings. "It was right there," Theo said, pointing to the second bed on the right. "My bed for 6 years." Lily studied everything carefully, as if trying to picture the boy Theo had been, sleeping there, living in this space. Theo walked slowly around the dorm, his footsteps echoing on the bare floor. He stopped by the wall next to where his bed had been and crouched, carefully examining a specific spot near the baseboard. "It's still here," he murmured to himself, more than to the others. Martha joined him, curious. "What are you looking for?" Gently, Theo scraped away a small bit of loose plaster, revealing faint chalk marks. "What's that?" Lily asked, moving her chair closer to see. Theo smiled, a smile full of memories. "Something I wrote when I was 10. The words, written in a shaky child's handwriting, were partially legible. "One day, I'm leaving this place." Martha leaned in, looking over his shoulder. "We've painted this wall at least 3 times since you left," she commented, surprised. "Amazing how some things endure." Theo touched the fading words, feeling an unexpected emotion, no bitterness or resentment, as he might have felt years ago, but a kind of compassionate understanding for the boy he'd been, so determined to escape, so desperate to belong somewhere. "I used to write that every night before going to sleep," he explained, still gazing at the nearly erased marks, "like a promise to myself." And you kept that promise, Martha observed. Yes, Theo said softly, but not in the way I expected. At that moment, he realized something he'd never considered. Even though he escaped physically, part of him had remained in that place all along, in those secret words, in that childish desire for freedom, in the memories both painful and sweet that he carried. I thought leaving here meant leaving everything behind, he continued, turning now to Lily. That I could just erase it all and start fresh. But you can't, right? Lily asked, with a wisdom that belied her age. No, he agreed. You can't, and maybe you don't need to. They stood in silence for a while, each absorbed in their own thoughts. It was Lily who finally broke it. Can I touch it? She asked, reaching her hand toward the wall. Theo nodded and helped maneuver her chair. With careful reverence, Lily ran her fingers over the almost invisible words, as though sensing through them the boy Theo had once been. Were you sad here? She asked, looking directly at him. The question, so direct and honest, took Theo by surprise. His first instinct was to protect Lily with a half-truth, something gentle that wouldn't make her uncomfortable. But he realized she deserved more. Sometimes, he admitted, there were very hard days. But there were good moments too, friends, caregivers like Martha, little victories. Like surviving, Lily concluded, again showing that uncanny understanding. Like surviving, Lily repeated, with a perception that took him by surprise again. Yes, he agreed, like surviving. Sensing the intensity of the moment, Martha discreetly suggested heading back downstairs. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving the air clean and fresh. The courtyard glistened with puddles reflecting a sky that was starting to clear. Can I show you something too? Lily asked when they reached the garden. Sure, Theo replied. She directed her wheelchair to a specific spot in the courtyard near the main gate. From there was a perfect view of the entrance, the street beyond the walls, the world outside. I come here every day, she explained, to see who arrives. Theo understood instantly. It was the perfect place to watch for visitors, potential adoptive parents, anyone who might change her destiny. It was the lookout of someone who waited to be chosen. He had once had his own lookout spot, years before, in a different corner of the courtyard, but with the same vantage point on the gate, the same mix of hope and fear. As they walked together across the courtyard, Theo smiled softly and said, When I was your age, I lived here too. Lily looked at him, surprised. You lived here? Theo nodded. For a few years. I also waited, watching that gate. She observed him silently, as though she understood more than words could explain. Then, she said softly, So you know what it's like. He gave her a sad smile. I do. That's why I come back. In that moment, they shared an understanding that went beyond age or circumstance. An understanding built on a shared experience, waiting, watching the gate with hope and fear, wanting to be chosen yet fearing rejection. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the damp courtyard. The other children had come out to enjoy the end of the rain, running around and laughing as their voices echoed in the open space. Martha had stepped away to keep an eye on them, leaving Theo and Lily alone with their thoughts. You know what I wanted most as a child here? Theo asked, watching the kids at play. Lily shook her head, waiting for him to continue. Someone who understood, he said. Someone who knew what it was like, without me having to explain. Lily nodded, her eyes locked on his. Me too. And now? He asked. What do you want most now? She thought for a moment, her fingers idly fidgeting with the fabric of her dress. Not to be scared, she finally answered. Scared of what? Everything, she said, with disarming simplicity. Of being chosen, of not being chosen, of being too much trouble, of being alone. The raw honesty of her words struck Theo to the core. He recognized in them his own childhood fears, fears he still carried in more adult guises. You know something, he said, kneeling so he was at her eye level. It's normal to be scared. Everybody is, even grown-ups. But you're braver than you think. How do you know? Because I see how you face each day, how you take care of your toys, how you do your drawings, how you read your stories. All that. even when it's hard. That's courage. Lily took in his words, searching his face for any sign of insincerity or empty reassurance. She found only truth. "You're braver too," she finally replied. "You came back to a place that made you sad." That observation, so simple and direct, brought forth a truth Theo hadn't fully grasped until that moment. Coming back to the orphanage was not just about charity or a good deed. It was also about facing his past, healing old wounds that had never properly closed. "I guess we're brave together then," he said, holding out his hand to her. Lily smiled and placed her small hand in his. "Together," she agreed. And so, under a sky gradually shifting from blue to gold, then tinged with the first purples of dusk, a child who was afraid of being chosen, and an adult who still carried the scars of never having been chosen themselves, found a moment of peace. Not because their circumstances had changed, but because they were no longer alone in their fears. Sunday dawned clear and mild, perfect for what Theo had been planning for weeks. He woke earlier than usual, triple-checked a small backpack he'd packed the day before, and drove to the orphanage well before the time he'd arranged. He felt nervous in a way he rarely did, even in multi-million-dollar executive meetings. He had spoken with the orphanage administration and, after a lot of paperwork, obtained special permission to take Lily out for a few hours. It required signing numerous documents, providing references, and even going through an interview with her case's social worker. Martha had helped a lot, vouching for Theo's trustworthiness and the benefits of the outing for Lily. Lily still didn't know. Theo wanted it to be a surprise. When he arrived, he found Lily already awake, having breakfast with the other children at a communal table. She smiled when she saw him, then frowned in confusion. He never came on Sundays, and certainly not this early. "Good morning," he said, approaching. "Ready for a surprise?" Lily blinked, intrigued. "What surprise? How about spending the day away from here, just the two of us?" Her eyes widened. She looked at him, then at Martha, who came over with a smile, then back at Theo. "I can leave. We have special permission," he explained. "For a few hours, but we have to be back before dinner." For a moment, Lily seemed unable to believe it. Then, slowly, the biggest smile he'd ever seen spread across her face. "Where are we going?" she asked, already pushing her cereal aside, excited for the adventure to begin. "It's a surprise," Theo repeated, "but I think you'll like it." An hour later, Lily, wearing a blue dress she'd specifically chosen for the occasion, was in Theo's car. Martha helped load her collapsible wheelchair in the trunk and gave Theo final instructions about Lily's medications and special care. Lily insisted on bringing Benny and Teddy, her inseparable companions. "They've never left the orphanage either," she said solemnly. "They need to see the world." Their first stop was a small flower conservatory on the outskirts of town. Theo had discovered it by chance while looking for a birthday gift for his assistant. It was a family-run place, not large or especially sophisticated like a big botanical garden, but it had a special charm and, crucially, was fully accessible for wheelchairs. When they arrived, Lily fell silent, taking in the view. It was a modest structure of glass and metal, surrounded by small outdoor flower beds. What caught her eye wasn't the size, but the colors, hundreds of different flowers creating a living mosaic of reds, pinks, yellows, purples, and whites. "It's like being inside a rainbow," Lily murmured, as Theo pushed her wheelchair along a path of smooth stones. The owner, an older lady with calloused hands and a gentle smile, came to greet them. Theo had called ahead, explaining the situation, and she had prepared a little surprise for Lily, a flower crown made of small daisies and sprigs of lavender. "For the princess of the garden," the woman said, placing the delicate wreath on Lily's head. Lily touched the petals gently, almost reverently. They spent almost 2 hours there. Lily wanted to see every type of flower, learn their names, touch their petals, and smell their scents. Theo watched, enthralled by her delight, by how her eyes lit up with each new discovery. The owner, noticing Lily's genuine interest, gave her a small potted plant she could care for herself, a violet with an intense purple hue that, according to the woman, bloomed year-round if treated kindly. "Just like you," she said, gently touching Lily's cheek. "Small but strong." As they left, Lily held the violet in her lap alongside Benny and Teddy, and Theo announced the second part of the surprise. "How about some ice cream now?" Lily's face lit up again. "Real ice cream, at an ice cream shop." Theo laughed at her question, which revealed so much about the limited life she'd led. "Yes, real ice cream, in a real shop. You can pick any flavor you want." They went to a small ice cream parlor in the city center. It wasn't busy at that hour. No crowds, no curious stares at Lily's wheelchair. They sat by the window. Lily examined the colorful menu with an expression of utter concentration, as if faced with the biggest decision of her life. "You've had ice cream before, right?" Theo asked, suddenly worried. "Sometimes at the orphanage," she replied, eyes still on the menu. "But only chocolate or strawberry, and small cups. Here there are so many flavors." After much deliberation, she chose a dish with 2 scoops, chocolate and pistachio, a combination that made Theo smile at her sophisticated palate. He ordered the same in solidarity. Watching Lily eat her ice cream was an experience in itself. She savored each spoonful with complete focus, as if memorizing the taste. There was no rush, no childlike urgency to gobble it before it melted. There was only pure pleasure at tasting something special, something not in her normal routine, something that might not happen again soon. "This is the best day of my life," she declared between bites, her tone so serious it squeezed Theo's heart. Right then and there, in the glow of the sun streaming through the window onto Lily's smiling face, her flower crown slightly askew and a bit of chocolate ice cream smudged by her mouth, Theo had a sudden impulse. He took out his phone. "Can I take a picture of you?" he asked. Lily looked surprised but nodded, straightening up and smiling, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and lit her entire face. Theo captured the image and immediately knew it was special. It was more than a photo. It was a record of a moment of pure joy, possibly the first time Lily had felt that kind of happiness since the accident that took her parents and left her in a wheelchair. He showed her the photo, and she examined it curiously. "Do I look pretty?" she asked, with the insecurity typical of her age. "Beautiful," Theo replied, with absolute sincerity. Back at the orphanage by late afternoon, Lily was exhausted but radiant. She carefully held the violet, as though it were a precious treasure. Benny and Teddy had also tasted the ice cream. In reality, Lily had offered them each a tiny spoonful so they could share the happiness. Martha met them at the entrance, and Lily immediately started recounting every detail about the flowers, the ice cream flavors, and how people on the street smiled at her in her flower crown. While listening to her describe each moment, Theo glanced again at the photo on his phone. He decided right then that he'd print it and frame it for his office, alongside the drawing she'd given him. But on his phone, he'd keep it in a special spot, a reminder he could carry anywhere, a talisman against bad days, stressful meetings, and the loneliness he'd often felt even when surrounded by people. The drive back to his place had never felt so long. While navigating the city's evening lights, Theo felt torn between the joy of the day just past and a growing restlessness he couldn't ignore. He kept seeing Lily's radiant face in his mind, the way her eyes sparkled over the pistachio ice cream, the reverent care she showed the little violet. His apartment felt strangely empty when he finally arrived. It was a stylish place, decorated with the minimalist taste he'd always favored, but now, for the first time, he sensed its oppressive silence, its lack of life. He set his keys on the coffee table and walked to the balcony, looking out at the city. Thousands of lights glittered in the darkness, thousands of lives unfolding simultaneously. While he stood there, alone with thoughts he couldn't manage, he took out his phone and looked again at Lily's photo. There was such purity in that smile, something that reminded him of a distant time when he still believed the world could be kind. For years, Theo had built his life around work. He had what many would call success, money, recognition, power. But none of it had prepared him for what he felt now, for the space this little girl in a wheelchair had opened in his heart, a space he hadn't even known was there. He sat in his favorite armchair, the one with a sweeping view of the city, and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He allowed himself to feel, really feel, without the barriers he normally kept so carefully in place. What he felt was overwhelming. The day with Lily hadn't been just an outing, some charitable act for a lonely child. It was a glimpse of another life, of another version of himself, one that could be more than the successful businessman, more than the orphan who overcame adversity, a version that could be a father. The word floated through his mind, both frightening and irresistible. Father. Something he had never seriously considered, something he had deliberately avoided. Theo had never planned to have children. He told himself it was because of his career, his lifestyle, a lack of time. But the truth, now painfully clear, was fear. Fear of failing. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of repeating, in some way, the abandonment he himself had suffered. How could he be a good father if he'd never had one to learn from? How could he provide stability, safety, unconditional love, things he'd never received? And yet, Lily. He thought of how she faced life with a courage many adults didn't have, how she smiled despite her losses, how she found wonder in tiny joys, how she kept every small treasure as if her life depended on it. He thought of how she understood him in a way no one else seemed able to. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that stirred him deeply. He knew her case file, the medical reports, the psychological evaluations. The doctors considered it unlikely she'd walk again. He knew about the medications, the therapies, the special needs. He knew that anyone adopting her would face challenges most people weren't prepared for. But he also knew, with surprising certainty, that none of that mattered. What mattered was that smile, those perceptive, intelligent eyes, that spirit which, in a strange way, seemed to complement his own. He stood and went to his office. Hanging on the wall was Lily's drawing, still in its place of honor. "My new friend," the simple inscription said. He stared at it for a long moment, letting the reality of what he was considering take full shape. Adopting Lily, giving her a permanent home, a family, even if it was just the two of them, a place where she'd always be the first choice, never left behind. A place where being too much trouble wouldn't matter, because love would be unconditional. The thought brought with it a wave of panic. Could he really do this? Could he raise a child, change his entire life, his priorities, his future? What if he failed? What if he ended up hurting her or letting her down, just like his own parents had done? He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He began searching about adoption, about children with special needs, about what it meant to be a single father. Hours passed as he absorbed information, statistics, and personal accounts. His hands trembled slightly, a physical sign of the battle raging inside him. He stopped when the sun started to rise, painting the sky pink and orange beyond his office window. He was exhausted, emotionally spent, but something had shifted. The idea that had felt so terrifying hours earlier now had more defined, tangible contours. It wouldn't be easy. It would require profound changes in his life. He'd have to learn, adapt, grow in ways he'd never imagined. He'd have to face his own demons, his own fears. But maybe that was exactly what he needed. Maybe the cycle of abandonment that had defined his childhood could be broken, not only through personal success, but through a deeper act of love, the commitment to be for another child what no one had been for him. He looked again at Lily's photo on his phone. Deep down, he realized the decision had been made the moment he saw her alone in that courtyard, saying she was too much trouble. Or maybe before that, somewhere in the depths of his soul, where the child he once was still waited for someone who would never return. He closed his eyes and, for the first time in a long while, allowed himself to dream of a different future. One that included a child's laughter echoing through his previously silent apartment. Colorful drawings taped to the fridge, bedtime stories and comfort for nightmares. Tough questions and honest answers, shared fears overcome together. A family. The days following that sleepless night passed in slow motion for Theo. What started as a terrifying idea had crystallized into a deep certainty. He made phone calls, rearranged his schedule, and restructured his agenda. His lawyer, surprised by the urgency, worked overtime to prepare all necessary documents. "Are you sure about this?" asked Bruce, his attorney of over a decade and probably the closest thing Theo had to a friend. This is a huge decision. Maybe you should think it over a bit longer. I've never been so sure of anything in my life, Theo replied, surprising even himself with how certain he sounded. The process wouldn't be simple or quick, Bruce explained. There would be interviews, home visits, psychological assessments, background checks, and even with Theo's resources and influence, it would take time. The adoption system's red tape made no distinction between millionaires and ordinary people when it came to determining parental suitability, but the first step was straightforward, formally declaring his intent. That was exactly what Theo planned to do that morning. He arrived at the orphanage earlier than usual. The familiar screech of the gate greeted him, but this time it sounded different. Not just a reminder of a painful past, but an announcement of a future full of possibilities. Instead of heading straight for the garden or library, he went to the administration office. The folder he carried felt like it weighed a ton. Though it contained only a few documents, the formal notice of his intent to adopt, and the initial paperwork for what would be a long process. The receptionist, used to his frequent visits, seemed surprised to see him in that part of the building. "I'd like to speak to Mrs. Richards, please," Theo said. "It's an important matter." Eleanor Richards had been the orphanage director for over 2 decades. She took over shortly after Theo left, so she hadn't known him as a child. But she'd spoken with him several times since he began visiting Lily, mostly about procedures for off-site permissions. After a brief wait, Theo was ushered into her office, a welcoming room, its walls lined with framed children's drawings and photos of smiling kids. Theo wondered how many of those children had found homes and how many were still waiting. "Mr. Walker," Mrs. Richards greeted, standing to shake his hand. "What a pleasant surprise. How can I help you today?" Theo sat in the chair she indicated, placing the folder on her desk. He took a deep breath. "I'm here about Lily," he began, his voice steadier than he'd hoped. "Specifically, her future." Mrs. Richards nodded, her expression neutral but attentive. "I want to adopt her," Theo said, finally voicing what his heart already knew. "I want her to know every day that she was chosen." For a moment, there was only silence. The ticking of the wall clock seemed unusually loud. Beyond the window, he could hear children's voices, faint laughter and shouts in the courtyard. Mrs. Richards's expression shifted from surprise to something softer, more emotional. "Mr. Walker," "Theo," she said, dropping the formality. "Your dedication to Lily these past months has been extraordinary. We've seen changes in her we never thought possible." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But adoption is a lifelong commitment, especially in Lily's case, with her special needs, her trauma." "I know exactly what I'm getting into," Theo interrupted gently but firmly. "I've done my research. I've talked to specialists. I've started adapting my apartment. I'm prepared." Mrs. Richards smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I believe you," she said. "And honestly, I can't think of a better home for Lily." She was about to continue when a soft noise at the door caught both their attention. They turned to see Lily in her wheelchair with Martha just behind her. "Pardon the interruption," Martha said, looking embarrassed. "Lily was looking for Theo, and it's quite all right," the director said, motioning them inside. "In fact, this conversation primarily concerns Lily." The girl looked from one adult to another, her expression inquisitive. She clearly sensed the serious atmosphere, but didn't know exactly what was going on. "What's happening?" she asked, staring directly at Theo. "You look weird." Her blunt remark, so typical of Lily, broke the tension in the room. Theo couldn't help smiling. "We were talking about you," he explained, moving to stand closer to her. "Something important." "What?" she insisted, clutching Benny and Teddy as though bracing for bad news. Theo exchanged a glance with Mrs. Richards, who nodded encouragingly. "Lily," he began, crouching to meet her eyes. "I spoke with Mrs. Richards about the possibility, about my desire to adopt you, to have you come live with me and be my daughter." The words hung in the space between them. Lily's face was a canvas showing surprise, confusion, doubt, and something more, something Theo couldn't quite read. She didn't smile right away as he might have expected. Instead, her eyes grew very serious, almost adult in their scrutiny. "What if I'm not what you expect?" she finally asked, her voice small but resolute. The question cut Theo to his core. It was exactly what he'd feared in reverse, that he might not be the father she deserved. And here she was, voicing the same worry, but from her own perspective. Theo crouched down further to be at her level, looking into her eyes with gentle firmness. "Lily, I don't expect you to be anything but who you already are. You don't have to prove anything. You're already everything I want." Lily's eyes filled with tears, though not of sadness. It was as if something very old and very heavy finally gave way inside her. "Really," she whispered. "Really," he confirmed. "I want you to be my daughter, not despite who you are, but because of who you are." Lily looked down at Benny, her tattered one-eyed bear, and then at Teddy, the doll Theo had given her. It seemed she was consulting her oldest friends, seeking their approval. At last, the smile broke. The one not just polite or forced, but radiant, transforming her entire face. "I do want that," she said with a quiet simplicity that held whole worlds. "I want to be your daughter." The months that followed were filled with paperwork, interviews, home visits, and preparations. The adoption process moved faster than usual, partly due to Theo's resources, partly because the orphanage staff unanimously supported it. During that period, Theo visited Lily almost daily. Together, they planned what their new life would be like. He showed her photos of his apartment, asked about her preferences, involved her in every decision. It was important she felt that this new chapter was being written by both of them, not just him. "What color do you want for your room?" he asked one afternoon, showing her a paint catalogue. Lily ran her fingers over the swatches, stopping at a soft lavender shade. "This one," she said confidently. "It looks like the sky just before it gets dark." A week before the official move, Theo took her to see what would be her new home. The apartment had undergone a transformation. Hallways had been widened to accommodate a wheelchair, small ramps replaced any steps, and furniture was rearranged for easier movement. Subtle changes, but they conveyed, "This place was prepared for you." Her bedroom, however, was anything but subtle. The walls were painted the exact lavender she had chosen. A canopy bed stood at the center, dressed with a quilt embroidered with tiny flowers, reminiscent of the crown she'd worn on their greenhouse outing. Low bookshelves lined the walls, perfectly reachable for someone in a chair. There were also toys, though not in an overwhelming quantity, each chosen with care. A giant teddy bear occupying a corner armchair, dolls of various ethnicities, a box of large building blocks, and a complete art station with materials beyond anything the orphanage or even Theo had previously provided. But at the center of everything, two small doll beds by the head of the big bed sat empty, waiting. "For Benny and Teddy," Theo explained, seeing her curious look. "I thought they might like their own beds, though they can still sleep with you, of course." Lily's eyes filled with tears. She didn't say a word, just opened her arms. Theo hugged her, understanding every unspoken sentiment. On the official moving day, Martha helped pack Lily's few belongings, some clothes, carefully stored drawings, favorite books, and of course, Benny and Teddy. It all fit into a single small suitcase, the sum of her 8 years of life. "Take good care of her," Martha told Theo, watching as Lily said her goodbyes to the other children. "She's stronger than she looks, but also more fragile than she lets on." "I promise," Theo replied, feeling the weight and privilege of that responsibility. Arriving at the apartment was simultaneously solemn and joyful. Lily wanted to see every room again, this time knowing she was seeing her permanent home. She paused to touch the furniture, look out each window, absorbing the reality of this new life. In her room, she unpacked her suitcase with meticulous care, assigning each item a specific spot. Theo watched from the doorway, offering help only when asked. He instinctively understood this was an important ritual for her. "Would this be okay?" he asked when she hesitated about where to place a stack of drawings. "Yes," she answered with a small smile. "That way, it feels like it's mine." That phrase became a kind of mantra in the following days. Whenever she arranged something, she'd confirm, "Like this, it feels mine." It was as though she was gradually claiming not just the physical space, but the very idea of belonging. The first few days were a delicate dance of mutual learning. Theo discovered that Lily was an early riser, but liked to lie in bed for a few minutes, watching the morning light. He learned she preferred crustless bread, hated the sound of the blender, and softly hummed to herself when she drew. Lily discovered that Theo sometimes worked late, that he made coffee way too strong, that he rarely laughed, but when he did, his whole face lit up. Most importantly, she learned that when he said, "I'll be right back," he really did come back. There were challenges, of course. The first night was tough. Lily woke up disoriented, forgetting where she was. Theo found her silently crying, clutching Benny and Teddy. "It's okay," he whispered, sitting on the edge of her bed. "You're home now." "How do I know I won't leave this place too?" she asked, her voice tiny in the dark. "Because this is our home now. Yours and mine, forever. Promise." "I promise. With all my heart." She fell asleep holding his hand, both of them needing that physical connection. Soon they established routines. Breakfast together was non-negotiable, even if Theo had an early meeting. He adjusted his work schedule, setting up a home office for days he didn't need to be at headquarters. Lily had therapy sessions, physical, occupational, and occasionally psychological. But Theo made sure there was time to just be a kid. Bedtime became a special ritual. At first, Lily felt shy about needing help, but she soon discovered Theo turned it into an adventure. Pirates and mermaids, making the necessary aid feel more like fun. He never treated her limitations as a burden, just a challenge they faced together. Together, they created their own traditions. Wednesday nights were movie marathons with popcorn. Sunday mornings meant pancakes, typically ending in a kitchen covered in flour and laughter. On rainy afternoons, they built blanket forts in the living room and read stories inside them, as if they were in another world. The apartment began to bear marks of their combined presence. One corner of the living room became known as Theo's nook, where he read the newspaper after dinner. A spot by the kitchen window was dubbed Lily's observation tower, where she liked to watch the city at sunset. The hallway to the bedrooms was decorated with her drawings, framed as if they were museum pieces. In Lily's room, Benny and Teddy held a place of honor. The doll beds were rarely used because the two companions still shared her pillow every night. Theo realized their presence brought her comfort. They represented continuity, a sense of permanence in a life marked by loss. There were mistakes and adjustments, of course. Theo, used to living alone, sometimes forgot to keep things within her reach or would move the furniture without warning. Lily, accustomed to the orphanage's strict structure, sometimes struggled with her newfound freedom to make choices, but every mistake became a chance to learn. When Theo placed her favorite cups on a shelf too high, the solution wasn't just retrieving them for her, but installing new pull-out shelves at her level. When Lily had an anxiety attack after accidentally breaking a cup, afraid he'd be angry, he didn't just say it was okay, he showed her, time and again, that her worth wasn't tied to being perfect. "We all break things sometimes," he explained, as they cleaned up the shards together. "Things can be replaced. People can't." One evening, about 3 weeks after she moved in, Theo passed by Lily's bedroom following a work call and found her lying awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. She shook her head. "I'm thinking." "About what?" She was silent for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "How different it feels." "What does?" "Being chosen," she said simply. "It's different from what I imagined." "How did you imagine it?" Lily hugged Benny and Teddy closer, as if drawing courage from them. "I thought I'd have to be different, happier, smarter, easier," she said, pausing. "At the orphanage, people always wanted easy kids." Theo's heart clenched to hear such an adult perspective from someone so young. "Being chosen doesn't mean you have to change," he said gently. "It means someone saw who you really are and thought, that's exactly who I need in my life." She considered that for a moment, then smiled, a slow smile that began small and gradually spread like a sunrise. "I think I like that definition." "Me too," Theo agreed. "Now go to sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." "Full of good things?" Full of our things, he corrected. Some will be easy, some will be hard, but they'll be ours. She nodded, satisfied with his honest reply. As her eyes drifted shut, still clutching Benny and Teddy, Theo realized that these first days together were teaching them the same fundamental lesson, that family isn't just about sharing good, easy moments. It's about creating a space where you can be completely real, fears, flaws, hopes and all, and still be loved. And that, more than lavender walls or new toys, was the true home they were building together. One day at a time, mistake by mistake, smile by smile, with the old teddy bear and the new doll sharing the same pillow, silent witnesses to a brand new beginning. The seasons began to change. Winter gave way to spring, bringing golden leaves to neighborhood trees and cooler morning breezes. For Lily and Theo, that change of season mirrored the transformations in their own lives. A new cycle was beginning, full of possibilities. 2 months had passed since Lily moved in. Their routines felt more established, the spaces in the apartment more familiar, and the silences between them more comfortable. There were still moments of adjustment, of course. Sometimes Lily would wake up crying at night, missing her parents. Some mornings Theo woke up anxious, terrified he might be incapable of giving her everything she needed. But these uncertainties, rather than driving them apart, seemed to strengthen the bond growing between them. One particularly sunny Saturday morning, while they were having breakfast, Lily kept staring at the empty space between the bookshelf and the main window in the living room. "What are you thinking?" Theo asked, noticing her concentration. "That corner," she said, pointing. "It looks empty." "What do you think should go there?" Lily pondered for a moment, absently poking at her cereal. "Maybe my drawings and some toys," she ventured, hesitating like she wasn't sure if her idea would be welcome. "It's our home, but sometimes it still feels too yours." That observation hit Theo with sudden clarity. It was true. Despite the adaptations for Lily, much of the apartment still felt like his old life. Minimalistic, stylish, adult, neutral tones, designer furniture, abstract art on the walls. It all spoke of the life he had before she came. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said with a smile. "In fact, let's make it our weekend project." "Sound good?" Lily's face lit up. "Really?" "Of course. It's your house, what too? It should have your touches everywhere." That very afternoon, they went to a home goods store. Lily selected simple, light wood frames for her favorite drawings, some brightly colored pillows, and a low bookcase to display her treasured toys. Theo watched her choose, surprised by how seriously she weighed each option, considering how each would fit the space. "This matches the sofa better," she explained, choosing a blue pillow over a red one. "It makes the room feel calmer." Theo smiled, impressed by her developing aesthetic sense. There was so much more to her than he yet knew, and each new discovery was fascinating. On Sunday, they devoted themselves to creating Lily's Corner, as it came to be called. Theo hung the frames at a perfect height for her to view them from the wheelchair. Together, they arranged her toys on the new shelf, the giant teddy bear on guard, the picture books lined up by size, the building blocks in a translucent box so the colors could be seen. Benny and Teddy, however, were not part of this display. When Theo suggested a place of honor for them, Lily shook her head. "They sleep with me," she said firmly. "They only come to the living room when I'm there." It was an important distinction, Theo noticed. There were display toys, and then there were essential companions, those that carried history and comfort beyond mere decoration. By the end of the day, the corner had been transformed. The framed drawings formed a small gallery of children's art, colorful horses, big windowed houses, and, of course, the increasingly frequent family drawings she made. A tall man in a suit and a girl in a wheelchair, hand in hand, always under a smiling sun. From her wheelchair, Lily surveyed the final arrangement, her eyes shining with satisfaction. "Now it feels like my home's too," she declared, smiling as though the entire room lit up with her. Something in that statement touched Theo deeply. The idea that a space could transform from his home to their home simply through some framed art and well-placed toys felt both simple and revolutionary at once. In the following days, he noticed Lily frequently pausing by her corner, rearranging a toy or admiring her drawings. It was as though that little claimed territory offered her the security to gradually make herself at home in the rest of the apartment. One afternoon, watching from the kitchen window, Theo saw something that subtly changed his perspective. Lily was in the condo's small garden, pushing her wheelchair along the stone path by herself. There were obstacles, small inclines, tight turns, patches of loose gravel, but she maneuvered them with determined patience, sometimes backing up to try another approach. His first instinct was to run to help her, but something made him wait and simply observe. He watched the concentration on her face, the satisfaction when she cleared a difficult stretch, the patience when she had to try again. There was no frustration in her repeated attempts, only a calm resolve. In that moment, Theo realized Lily didn't need him to save her. She only needed him beside her. She didn't want every obstacle removed from her path. She only wanted the reassurance that he'd be near if she needed help. He went downstairs to the garden, but rather than rush to assist, he sat on a nearby bench. "Exploring?" he asked casually. Lily nodded, skillfully navigating around a larger rock. "I'm mapping things out," she explained. "I need to know where I can go alone and where I'll need help." The practicality of her approach impressed him. Instead of lamenting her limitations, she was identifying them, working within them. "You learn anything useful?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, stopping next to the bench. "I learned I like trying by myself first." "I think that's very wise," he agreed. "And if you ever need me, I'm here." She smiled, that slow grin that started in her eyes and spread across her face. "I know." That simple affirmation, "I know," carried a world of trust. Theo wasn't sure he'd earned yet, but was determined to live up to. That night after dinner, they sat in the living room for their usual bedtime reading. Lily picked a book about a family of rabbits who rebuild their home after a storm. The story was about cooperation and how each family member contributed something different. When they finished, Lily stayed quiet for a moment, absently stroking Teddy's hair as Benny rested on her lap as well. "What did you think of the story?" Theo asked. "I liked it," she said. "But they had to build a new house because they lost their old one." Theo nodded, sensing how the story could stir difficult memories. "Yes, sometimes we lose things we love and have to build something new." Lily didn't speak for a while, still stroking the doll in her arms. "I miss my parents," she said finally, her voice small yet steady. "But now I have a new family. You made me smile again." The simple words washed over Theo like gentle but powerful waves. He felt his eyes grow moist, making no effort to hide his emotion. "You made me smile again, too," he admitted. It was true. Before Lily, his life was filled with professional success, but very few moments of genuine joy. Now, even on hard days, there were flashes of laughter, shared discoveries, small triumphs they celebrated together. That night, as he tidied the kitchen after putting Lily to bed, Theo pondered how his idea of home was shifting. He'd always thought in terms of physical structures, walls, furniture, and a dress. But he was beginning to realize that home was not just a place, but a feeling of belonging, acceptance, emotional safety. Lily's corner in the living room was more than just decoration. It was a statement of permanence, a visual affirmation that she wasn't a visitor in his life but an essential part of it. In the same way, her acceptance of this new reality didn't erase her past, but bridged it into a future they were building together. As he turned off the lights, Theo paused briefly at the corner they'd created. In the dark, only the shapes were visible, but that was enough. That small, personalized space had turned his apartment from a residence into a home, a place where both could be exactly who they were, with all their histories, wounds, and hopes, a place that now belonged to both of them. Winter gave way to spring. Flowers began to bloom in the small condo garden, and the mornings held that unique light only the lengthening April days can bring. 6 months had passed since Lily moved in with Theo. 6 months of adjustments, discoveries, little victories, and the occasional stumble. Life had found its own rhythm. Theo continued his work, but with a more flexible schedule, holding many meetings from home. Lily attended a new school adapted for her needs, where she was making friends and, to Theo's delight, showing a special knack for art. She still attended therapy, physical, occupational, and sometimes psychological, but these no longer dominated her schedule as before. The apartment, too, had evolved. Lily's corner in the living room had expanded and now included a small art table, always littered with ongoing projects. Her framed drawings were no longer confined to that space. They appeared everywhere: the fridge, the hallway, even the bathroom. Gradually, the neutral tones and minimalist decor Theo once preferred had given way to color, texture, and signs of a shared life. Lily herself had changed, not just in how she'd grown a bit taller or put on some weight. Her cheeks were fuller, her eyes more lively, her smile more frequent. Her hair, once kept in uneven braids for practicality, was sometimes loose now, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Subtle transformations that reflected her well-being and sense of safety. Theo also wasn't the same. The always immaculate executive was now sometimes spotted at video conferences with flecks of paint on his fingers or a forgotten hair tie on his wrist. He smiled more, slept better, and for the first time in decades, kept personal photos in frames around his office. Not just Lily's original drawing, but actual pictures of them together. One particularly pleasant Saturday morning, Theo took advantage of the sunshine to tidy the condo's small garden. The other residents rarely used it, and he had permission to plant flowers and herbs he knew Lily would love. Wearing worn clothes and gardening gloves, an image that would shock his colleagues, he pruned some shrubs, humming absent-mindedly. Lily was on the adjacent balcony that overlooked the garden, seated at a portable drawing desk. She worked intently on some project, occasionally looking up to watch Theo, then returning to her art with renewed inspiration. A serene closeness settled between them, each engaged in their task, yet aware of the other's presence. "What are you drawing?" Theo asked, removing his gloves for a break. "Our house," she said, turning the paper so he could see. The drawing did not depict their real apartment, but an imagined house, bright, whimsical, with large circular windows, a shiny red door, and ramps instead of stairs. In the garden, two figures, a tall one and a smaller one in a wheelchair, were planting flowers together. In the sky, in addition to the ever-present smiling sun, were two special clouds containing 4 faces: Lily's parents and brother, Theo realized, plus one who seemed to be a younger version of him, perhaps the boy he once was. The emotional complexity of the picture deeply moved him. It wasn't just a fantasy house, but a representation of how Lily saw their new family, connected to the past yet building something new. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely, "especially the round windows. They're like hugs for the light to come in," she explained, with the peculiar logic of childhood that often hides profound truths. Theo sat on the step of the balcony, near her wheelchair. For a few moments they simply appreciated the garden and the peacefulness of the morning. There was a comfort in these shared silences that Theo had never experienced in any other relationship. "Can I ask you something?" Lily finally said, her tone suddenly serious. "Of course." "Anything." She hesitated, twisting a colored pencil in her fingers. "Did you really choose me?" The question took Theo by surprise, not so much for what it asked, but for the timing. After 6 months together. "Why now?" "Of course I did," he said, leaning closer. "You know that." "But..." She frowned, clearly grappling with complicated feelings. "All those people who visited the orphanage and never chose me, they saw my wheelchair, my complications. Why were you different?" In her words, Theo heard layers of insecurity he thought had been put to rest, but he understood some wounds take a long time to heal. Maybe something happened at school, a passing remark, or just her own introspection, that revived old fears. He chose his words carefully, knowing they mattered. "I think we chose each other," he finally said. "I wasn't looking to become a father when I first came to the orphanage. I was just there because, well, for my own reasons. But then you spoke to me, showed me your world, and something changed. Something I can't fully explain." Lily listened intently, soaking up every syllable. "When you meet the right people," he continued, "it's not like picking out a present in a store. It's more like recognizing someone who was meant to be in your life, even if you didn't know it yet. A small smile formed on Lily's face. So it wasn't pity? Definitely not, Theo assured her, sensing this had been her biggest fear all along. It's because you're exactly who I needed in my life. Without realizing it, I'd been looking for you for a very long time. Lily mulled this over, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. She resumed coloring her drawing, adding more details to the imaginary garden. You're not too much trouble either, you know, she said casually, not looking up. Theo raised his eyebrows, amused by her remark. I'm not? No, she said, now grinning mischievously as she lifted her eyes to him. You learn fast, too. You can almost braid my hair without any tangles. Theo laughed, recalling his disastrous first attempts at braiding her hair, messes that looked more like bird nests than neat braids. I'm improving, huh? Yes, Lily said with a theatrical pause. But you still need practice. They both laughed at the inside joke, recalling rushed mornings with Theo wrestling hair ties and following YouTube tutorials. It was moments like these that surprised Theo the most. Not the big milestones or notable achievements, but these small daily interactions that had quietly turned two lonely lives into a family. The journey wasn't linear or always easy. There had been nights of nightmares and days of insecurities, practical challenges of living with a child with special needs, moments of doubt about whether he could be the father Lily deserved. There was the night she had her first high fever and the panic he felt rushing her to the ER at 3 in the morning, the first parent-teacher conference at her new school, where he felt out of place among couples who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. The time Lily cried inconsolably on the anniversary of the accident that took her parents, and he feared nothing he did would be enough to ease her pain. But for every difficult moment, there were also wonderful discoveries. The first time Lily called him Dad, without fanfare or planning, simply over breakfast while asking him to pass the jam. The afternoon she managed, after months of therapy, to move from her wheelchair to the couch on her own, the pride shining in her face worth more than any business success Theo had ever had. The Christmas they spent together, creating their own traditions that mixed old memories with new hopes. With every obstacle, every challenge, something unexpected happened. They grew stronger together. It wasn't Theo rescuing Lily, nor Lily healing Theo's past. It was more complex yet simpler than that. Two imperfect people, scarred in different ways, finding in each other's vulnerabilities the strength to move forward. The truth, clearer now than ever in the spring sunshine, was that they hadn't saved each other. They had rebuilt themselves brick by brick, day by day, in an ongoing process that would likely last a lifetime. Watching Lily on the balcony, sunlight dancing in her hair, Theo felt a profound gratitude, not just for the happiness she brought him, but for the person he was becoming through her, more patient, more present, more capable of seeing beauty in small, everyday moments. The true home they had built wasn't simply the apartment with its ramps and Lily's corner, nor even the fantasy house in her drawings with the hug windows. Their real home was in the invisible spaces between them. The trust slowly gained, the routines formed, the comfortable silences, the laughter over messy braids. They had built the most special kind of house, one that existed in each other's hearts. A house with no walls or limits, one that no one could ever take away. A house where the wounds of the past weren't erased, but welcomed and woven into the new story they were writing together, day after day. A house where they would never be alone again. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.